This is Diane Mourglia-Swerdlow, and I am filling in for Stewart and myself because as I speak, Stewart is in Turkey and soon will be heading for Amman, Jordan. So he is having a very busy time, not only lecturing and teaching, but collecting new information and news, which he will be reporting on during our October conference. So, this is our Expansions News podcast for the third week in September. And the latest news, which I found very fascinating, because I have a lot of fascinating stories again this week, is that the Pope is saying that the Vatican will shelter 2 families fleeing from war or hunger. Apparently, he's also calling on Catholic parishes, convents, and monasteries across Europe to do the same. Because I've been saying, why isn't he putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak? Well, honestly, 2 families, that's a nice show, but I think that they could do a lot better than that. But he is doing something. However, the reason behind him doing something is to set the tone for everybody else to do the same. Because he is asking bishops throughout Europe to have their dioceses take up his call to, quote, express the gospel in concrete terms and take in a family of refugees. Now, on the surface, this all sounds really nice. However, who are these people? That's something that we don't know. And even here in the U.S., you cannot come or go outside of our country's borders without a passport. And that's not so easy. We're practically strip searched at the borders. We have to go through x-ray machines. There are do not fly lists. There are all kinds of things that make it difficult for people to come in and out across our borders. So by opening up our borders to everybody out there, what's going to happen and who's going to come in, that remains to be seen. Apparently, Italy has already 120,000 people on its shores after its rescue at sea, and they're hoping for asylum in Europe. And apparently, there are 27,000 parishes in Italy, and if each parish hosted 1 family of 4, more than 108,000 people would have shelter. And as I said, it sounds really good, but what's really going to happen? Now, meanwhile, in Iceland, I've had a lot of people asking me about this because we have a lot of ties to Iceland. More than 11,000 Icelanders supposedly are opening their homes, or saying they will open their homes to Syrian refugees. However, right now, the government of Iceland is only obligated to take in 50 asylum seekers per year. And before, we have talked about how the Icelandic people are trying to keep their genetics as pure as possible. And as we know, most countries these days are not that way. So even though they're saying 11,000 families, remember Iceland only has a total population of 300,000 people total. So we have to take a look at that. Now apparently with the pressure that's going on, and perhaps global pressure, the country's welfare minister is saying, quote, they are our future spouses, best friends, the next soulmate, a drummer for our children's band, the next colleague, Miss Iceland in 2022, how she got that date I don't know, the carpenter who finally finishes the bathroom, the cook in the cafeteria, a fireman and television host, unquote. People of whom will never be able to say in the future, your life is worth less than mine, she finishes off. So, my point still is who are these people? And I understand that there are people who truly do need help, but if we don't know who they are, what is that going to mean to the countries? Those in Europe, those in Iceland, and I'm sure eventually it will come here to the US. Now, there was a lady who wrote in on my blog the other day. She's from the UK, and she said that she heard on the news the other day that 1 in 10 of the people in the UK would be willing to share their home with refugees. She says they're trying to bring back the community feelings of World War II, where the people in the country worked together for the war effort in a variety of ways, including hosting children from the big cities to stay with families in less dangerous situations. She says the plan of the powers that be is moving forward rapidly, and she personally is choosing not to be a part of it. So again, I want to ask you, who are these people? Because if you read what's going around the internet, it does not paint a pretty picture. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't know if you heard this one, but apparently there were some drone attacks being planned by terrorists to assassinate Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles. And you'll be happy to know that the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, revealed that these 3 ISIS terrorists in Syria who were plotting to assassinate the Queen and the Prince have been killed by drones. So again, there's no way we can verify that, but they're trying to make themselves look good, and again, they're pushing these drones, and you should accept them because they're wonderful. So keep that in mind. And continuing on in the UK, researchers say that Stonehenge used to have a giant neighbor about 4,500 years ago. Apparently, the Stonehenge Hidden Landscape Project, didn't know there was such a project, but anyway, they just discovered a superhenge monument that would have stood just a mile or so away from the smaller Stonehenge. Now, this has been coming in and out of the news for quite some time. I've been reporting on it, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. And apparently, their research is moving along because apparently with the latest technologies, according to the lead researcher, he or she says, we've been able to look underneath the banks to see what they hide. And this evidence suggests that there used to be a row of approximately 90 stones, some of which could have stood 15 feet tall. And they say there are at least 30 to 40 still there. They've just been pushed over and a massive bank has been placed on top of them. Now, a couple of things come to mind. Now, many of you may be remembering that and looking forward to, hopefully in October at our conference, Mary Sutherland, paranormal researcher, will be one of our guest speakers, and she's going to be speaking about the red-haired giants of North America. And I'm also reading a couple other books that are also very fascinating about giants all over the earth. So I'm wondering if this is going to be bringing out something of that hidden history, but that remains to be seen. Now, what is interesting at the end of this article, it says the team's leading prehistorian says everything written previously about the Stonehenge landscape and the ancient monuments within it will need to be rewritten. So here we go. We're changing history. We're rewriting it again. And the University of California is now offering 6 choices for gender identity. I mentioned to you about this last week, so I wanted to be sure and get this story in for you. Apparently, admission applications used by the University of California system are giving potential students a host of choices for gender-related questions, including 6 varieties to describe gender identity. And these are volunteer. You don't have to answer these apparently. But anyway, applicants can choose from male, female, trans male, trans man, trans female, trans woman, gender queer, gender non-conforming, and different identity. So that's quite a list. Some of them, it says, are limiting in their potential answer. For instance, they ask questions like, what sex were you assigned at birth? And that one only has 2 choices, male or female. A question about sexual orientation features 3 possible responses, heterosexual or straight, gay or lesbian, and fill in the blank. And apparently the UC is going to be putting in gender-neutral restrooms and changing rooms and initiating a 2-year project designed to coordinate and promote interdisciplinary studies of genders and sexualities. University of California President Janet Napolitano says, I'm proud of the work we've done so far, but it doesn't stop there. We must continue to look at where we can improve so everyone at UC feels respected and supported, unquote. So again, I call it gender confusion. They're calling it gender identity. That's up to you. Next, we have research on GM embryos, which should be allowed, and now people are arguing for that. And of course, we already know that's been done, but now the debate is now public. And apparently there is a group called the Hengsten Group, which is a collective of stem cell researchers, policy experts, and bioethicists. And they released a statement last week saying, quote, we acknowledge that when all safety, efficacy, and governance needs are met, there may be morally acceptable uses of this technology in human reproduction, though further substantial discussion and debate will be required. And of course, we know that it's already happening. Now, this time, the National Institute of Health, which funds medical research, currently refuses to provide money for work on genetically modified embryos. I said, yeah, right. Quote, the concept of altering the human germline in embryos for clinical purposes has been debated over many years from many different perspectives and has been viewed almost universally as a line that should not be crossed. Well, it's been crossed, and I'm sure it will continue to be crossed, and that's going to happen. And moving along with that line of thinking, how about we reach into the world of starfish? Because they're calling starfish perhaps the fountain of youth, or the key to the fountain of youth, because apparently starfish can reproduce by cloning or sexually, which I did not realize that before. They have the choice. And Swedish scientists say that starfish age at a slower rate when they reproduce through cloning rather than sexually. Apparently, when they reproduce sexually, they are at a disadvantage when it comes to aging, because this has to do with the starfish's telomeres, which is the lengths of DNA found at the ends of chromosomes. They protect genetic data and make it possible for cells to divide. And each time a cell divides, telomeres shorten in length, and as they shorten, aging occurs. But when starfish use cloning as a method of reproduction, newly formed tissue emerges longer than the old tissue. So you can say that there is a rejuvenation of the telomere when new tissue is formed during cloning as opposed to sexual reproduction. So it says, as for now, starfish will have to be the only known species to benefit from this fountain of youth, as humans have yet to be cloned. Again, right. And the article ends with, but who knows what the future holds. So this will be another reason for you to clone yourself in the future, because it will slow down your aging process, apparently. Now, Kim Kardashian continues to be in the news. And the reason I brought her up is a couple of different reasons in this story. Kim Kardashian, as some of you may know, is Armenian. And because she is Armenian, many of you may remember or have heard about through, let me put it this way, I've heard about through history, when in 1915, when the Ottoman Turks began rounding up the Armenian community's intellectual leaders, and basically there was a lot of what the Armenians called genocide. Now, the Turks do not admit to that. The U.S. does not admit to that, but Kim Kardashian continues to bring forward this in her public appearances. She's also being called the new Kate Middleton, and again, always referred to as the new American, or not new, but as American royalty. And the author of this article wrote, the queen of the selfies has finally used her attention for good, and hopefully it won't be as short-lived as some of her other memes. And listen to this, there's a crusade I can follow in any medium. So again, they're pushing forward the idea of the crusades. So a lot of strange things are going on in there. We want to continue to watch the Kardashians because they're a clue of what's happening out there in the world, and eventually will filter down into you personally, unfortunately. The Air Force wants owners to give up property near secret Area 51. Apparently there's a family there, and they have been there for several generations. They're being told to take a $5.2 million last best offer for their property, or the government will seize the property through condemnation. The Air Force officials are calling it a matter of national security, but the family members say this property is a symbol of their grandparents' and great-grandparents' blood, sweat, and tears. And speaking of the military, apparently, U.S. Army's Dugway Proving Ground is working with Department of Homeland Security for the release of 5 and 10 tons of chlorine gas, which is a chemical that, of course, can be deadly if it's inhaled in high concentrations. Now, the test series deemed, listen to this, Jack Rabbit 2, that sounds very programming, doesn't it? It says it is meant to simulate large-scale chlorine gas leaks because millions of tons of toxic chemicals, such as chlorine, are transported each year through urban communities in massive quantities, including 90-ton rail cars and 20-ton tanker trucks. So the spokesperson said, quote, it's scary, but that's why we're trying to understand it so we can be proactive. We are interested in saving lives no matter what the source is. Now, apparently, in 2010, the grounds conducted a similar test. This was Jackrabbit 1. And the spokesperson said, we're kind of flying blind until we actually do the test and figure out the way it's actually going to behave. And of course, they're telling the residents that it's not going to affect them in any way because they claim the further that it gets away from the test site that, of course, they only sense a slight amount of chlorine. So apparently they conducted nerve gas tests in 1968 when thousands of Utah sheep in Toole County began dying. In 1970, a report by Maryland researchers said there was incontrovertible evidence that a nerve gas killed the sheep, but the U.S. Army has not acknowledged that the Dugway testing was to blame. And this was kind of scary because they said according to the federal government's Hazardous Substances Emergency Events Surveillance Database, chlorine incidents occur in the U.S. at least once every 5 days, and 1/3 of the incidents cause injuries. So I thought that was interesting. And then, as some of you may have read about these 120,000 rare Kazakhstan antelopes that died over a series of 2 weeks that scientists say they don't understand why. Well, I'm wondering if they're not conducting some kind of similar test in an area, again, where people really aren't going to protest. So it's news for 2 minutes and then we forget about it, so to speak. And how about the bones in the South African cave, which supposedly are revealing a new human relative? This find apparently took place in 2013, but of course they're just now talking about it. And guess what that cave is called? Rising Star Cave System. And of course, as Stewart and I have told you, and you read about hopefully in Blue Blood, that the human species, as we now know it, is really a product of alien genetic manipulation. So if you haven't read Blue Blood and also True World History, you might want to take a check on those. But they're saying that this creature shows a surprising mix of human-like and more primitive characteristics. Some experts are calling it bizarre and weird. And not only are they questioning how old are the bones, they want to know how they got in this chamber, because apparently the passages are as narrow as about 7.5 inches. So what I want to know is, how did this supposed spelunker find it if it's only 7.5 inches? How did he find the bones? He or she find the bones? Anyway, so there are people that are questioning the find, but of course these people are standing by their story. So let's see what happens with that. And here's a follow-up on a story that I did, I think about a year ago. And that was about the world's first head transplant patient. It was a man severely disabled from Russia with a genetic muscle wasting condition called Verdnick-Hoffman disease, who's volunteered for the procedure. And supposedly there's an Italian neurosurgeon, Dr. Sergio Canavero, who is going to perform this procedure. And when I reported on this, it was kind of in the planning stages. Now they've actually said that it will happen in 2017. So we'll see what happens with that one, but we'll continue to follow it. And then I have in Amsterdam. You may have read this one about a blood rave, which is going to supposedly happen on Halloween in Amsterdam in an undisclosed nightclub. And they're going to be prepared to spray gallons of blood over guests in its first blood rave. They said the party was inspired by the 1998 film Blade, which was described as a nightlife community for like-minded individuals. Promoters have prompted speculation regarding the potential use of real blood. So I researched this a little bit further, and everywhere I look, they're saying yes, this is, they're calling it a historic event, which is either incredibly disturbing or fascinatingly thrilling, depending on the type of person you are. And again, they're saying the party will take place in a discreet location. It has an anonymous organizer, and apparently nearly 1,000 people have RSVP'd so far. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that one if it does take place. And my last story. This was kind of one I was going to ignore, but it kept coming up in the news, and so I'm thinking, why is this continuing to come up in the news? And every time it's something which I think is kind of a blasé story or a nothing story, why are they continuing to promote it? This was about a woman who explains why she was having sex with her passed out drunk boyfriend in the middle of a parking lot in broad daylight. So why would they be promoting that? Well, I've been telling you that they're going to be promoting public nudity and public sexuality. And so the first thing you're going to say is, oh my gosh, this is crazy, this is stupid, blah, blah. And then again, it's like everything else. It becomes acceptable to you because you're hearing about it all the time. It becomes nonchalant. And there was also an article about, I think it was on Norwegian Airlines, about a couple that had supposedly copulated in a restroom, and then when the plane landed, the hostess made a comment about it and the plane applauded. So, this is going to be continuing on down this path, so just be prepared, because it's all coming around the bend. Whatever you want, whoever you want to be, however you want to do it, is going to be acceptable for a time being. And then you're going to be categorized into specific lines for specific reasons. You'll find out, but it's not going to be pretty. So keep your eyes open. I want to remind you that our October conference is right around the corner. Mary Sutherland, paranormal researcher from Burlington, Wisconsin, will be here with some never-before-seen artifacts, and we'll be talking about red-haired giants in North America. We have Steve Spirason, who will be joining us to speak about the Magdalene frequency and how it relates to ISIS. We will have Gary the Numbers Guy, who will be talking about how the Illuminati hide numbers in plain sight and the economic crash, what you can do about that, and when that will be recovering. And of course, we have Christopher Garetano, who will be showing Montauk Chronicles. You will be able to question him and Stewart afterwards. So that's going to be quite a fascinating event. And Stewart and I will be talking about clear energy and a host of other hidden histories and mysteries from his latest travels. So we thank you for joining us here in October, because we already have a lot of people registering and we want to make sure you get a spot. So if you are interested in coming, be sure you sign up right away. And of course, we are going to be providing you with a complimentary burger bar for lunch on Saturday and Sunday at the Hilton Garden Hotel. We have in January always our week-long Oversoul Hyperspace Extravaganza. We have people again signing up from all over the world, so we invite you to come if you really want to learn about what we're doing and how we're doing it. This is where we teach you. We give you a chance to ask a lot of questions, and we give you hopefully a plan that you can move forward with for the next year as we move into some very challenging times. So be sure to join our site, like our Facebook fan page, and I look forward to visiting with you one more week solo, and then we will have Stewart back. So thank you again for joining me. Diane Mourglia-Swerdlow, expansions.com.